My number one argument is the pragmatic argument. If you care about people doing well academically, being prepared for careers, to have a successful life, the number one thing you need to do is find something that gives them energy, that lights them up, that makes them feel animated. Because a sullen child sitting in a classroom being drilled on algebra isn't going to happen. All the studies about education and learning show us that it's the motivation of the teacher and the motivation of the learner that have the most to do with whether the person learns. So there's this famous study done of foreign language learning that looked at total immersion and old-fashioned grammar, drill and repeat, learn vocabulary. And what they found is that either method worked beautifully if the student was motivated. And the thing that correlated most with the student's motivation was the teacher motivated. So if the teacher loves new methods, that probably works better. If the teacher likes old methods, that may work fine. So the number one reason to teach music in schools is there are a lot of students for whom that's the pathway to opening them up to the idea of learning in the first place. So when you practice an instrument every day, it gives you discipline. When you play in an ensemble, you learn to work with other people. When you learn to read music, you're learning a new language, and every language you learn makes the next one you learn easier. You get tapped into these deep traditions like the jazz tradition or the European classical music tradition that make you interested in the history. Like, where did the blues come from? Suddenly, American history is interesting to me. What was Bach all about? Well, suddenly, Europe 300, 400 years ago is interesting to me. So I think number one, it's a very useful tool for helping everyone feel connected to their history and have some motivation for learning. But there are also some examples of people, and there's an interesting story I remember reading. I was reading a biography of John Coltrane, who said that his most formative musical influence outside his family was his high school music teacher. And John Coltrane grew up in Hamlet, North Carolina, in the middle of the sort of worst period of Jim Crow segregation, when the schools of North Carolina were terrible for all students, but particularly for black students. And yet, that school somehow found a way to make available to him a music teacher who was more influential than anyone he ever studied with subsequently. So the fact that Boston, Massachusetts, or Los Angeles, California, with all the wealth we have, cannot make available simple music teachers to students who have the kind of gifts that a John Coltrane has is criminal. So even if I would argue to a pragmatist, you need to do it because it motivates people to learn, and maybe then they'll get more interested in history or math or science. But at a deeper level, a more spiritual level, I think we need to do it because a lot of the spiritual strength of people resides in ways that can't be reached necessarily through academics. And then a final point of view I have is that the two things that, if you're a great student today in an American inner city school, if you do really well on SAT kind of tests, you're going to get plucked out of that system and you're going to go to Harvard or Stanford or Yale and you're going to be fine. If you're not, then the system has become so focused on high stakes testing and on academic achievement that there's not much left for you. And many of the people I know who've been the most successful entrepreneurs or in other parts of their lives weren't great students, but they were great athletes or they were great musicians. And athletics and music had been the two things that kept people who hated school willing to come to show up and at least finish. And I think when you take away athletics and music, which is part of what's happening in America today, you take away the two magnets that were the things that kept the mediocre student who had amazing gifts, the person who might have dyslexia or some kind of learning disabilities or some impediment to their learning, but it masks a deeper kind of intelligence that could get manifest in some other way in the world, like starting a great company or like writing a brilliant piece of music or writing a great novel. So many of the people who do those things weren't great students, getting A+ in every class.